Lando Norris is the closest challenger to Max Verstappen in the 2024 F1 World Championship, and right now McLaren is the fastest car on the grid and they lead the Constructors' Championship. So, will Lando Norris fight for this year's World Championship? No. And in today's video, I am going to be discussing why that is the case. If you enjoyed the video, then please hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now, let's get into the video. So, why will Lando not win this year's F1 World Championship? Well, sadly, there is a few reasons why I don't think he will win the title, even though McLaren has overall the fastest car and has done for a few months. And this is really the first reason why I don't think Lando will be able to win the championship. He has had the fastest car, but McLaren and Lando Norris failed to really capitalise on this. There has been a number of races which Lando should have won, but for whatever reason, he has not. And this really meant that Norris has struggled to close the gap to Max Verstappen, and instead, he's closed the least amount of points possible on Max, despite having that strongest car. McLaren themselves really took too long to properly back Lando as well as their main driver, and this meant Norris gave away crucial points in Budapest and then at Monza as well, where Piastri pretty much put Norris to shame at the start. In Baku, Norris and McLaren really messed up qualifying. They pretty much allowed Norris to get caught out by a yellow flag. Now, I know you might be thinking that's harsh to blame McLaren and Lando on a random yellow flag, but they had the fastest car, or at the very least, the second fastest car. Why are they then allowing themselves to be towards the drop zone at the end of Q1, when they could have gone out about a minute or so earlier and set an extra banker lap which would have seen them safely through? These are critical errors, and Lando himself also made a mistake during that Q1 lap in Baku. These are errors which Red Bull, and more specifically Max Verstappen, never really made when they had the fastest car. When they had the fastest car, you already knew Max was going to win the race. He might not put it on pole, but it didn't really matter. Verstappen and Red Bull would maximise every opportunity, and Max would almost inevitably find his way back to first place. If McLaren and Lando didn't make some silly errors, they would find themselves having a lot more points and they would be a lot closer to Max Verstappen. This brings me on to my second point. Max is still, for the most part, maximising his results every single race weekend and is allowing Lando to do the least amount of damage possible to his title hopes. So much so that all Max has to do now is finish second to Lando every single race, and he will win the World Championship. Whereas Lando Norris, if he wants to close the gap, really needs to start winning race in and race out and collecting fastest laps. And honestly, based on what we have seen, there is no guarantee that that will happen every single race. Lando needs Max and Red Bull to fall a bit further away still. Even in Singapore, where Lando Norris dominated the race, he still hit the wall twice. Once with a lockup, which is fair enough, but the other time he drifted towards the wall and brushed it, similarly to what George Russell did last year, which resulted in a crash on the final lap of the race. This doesn't really fill me with confidence that he can win race in and race out. The competition in general is so close now that every single mistake will result in lost ground, similar to what we saw with Leclerc in Baku. He was too slow on those outlaps and lost a 6-second gap in only a couple of laps and ended up losing the race because of it. Max Verstappen, for the most part, doesn't make that many mistakes, and there's not really any races where you can look at the results and say, yeah, Max should have collected more points than that, other than maybe Budapest and Austria, in which both races had incidents related to them. The third reason why McLaren and Lando will not win the Drivers' Championship is because the competition is coming thick and fast. In Austin, we are expected to see large upgrades coming from Mercedes, Red Bull and Ferrari. To me, these upgrades are going to decide the final part of the season. For McLaren, they need to hope and pray pretty much that Mercedes and Ferrari bring upgrades which see them move ahead of Red Bull, but not ahead of them. And they also need to hope that Red Bull's upgrades don't bring them any closer to McLaren. But if Mercedes and Ferrari and Red Bull all close up on McLaren in terms of performance, then we are going to see a titanic battle, which will lead to McLaren losing race wins, which will instantly make Norris's life a lot more difficult if he wishes to compete for this year's World Championship. Lando currently needs to close the gap to Max Verstappen by an average of 8.66 points per race, which is a lot unless Norris wins a lot of those races. And the fourth reason why Norris will not win this year's World Drivers' Championship is because, well, since he won his first race back in May, he has closed the gap to Verstappen by a whopping 1 point. Yep, that is right. McLaren and Norris have pretty much had the fastest car since May, but they have only closed 1 point on Max Verstappen since then. Now, don't get me wrong, since then the level of competition has changed. McLaren has continued to get faster, while Red Bull has continued to stay stagnant. But even so, that's it. 1 point. It's really not a lot, is it? Now, as this graph shows, Lando did actually fall even further behind, and at one point the gap was as large as 84 points after Silverstone. But even so, the amount that Norris has closed the gap is really not enough, which goes back to my earlier point, Verstappen is maximising every single weekend, whereas Lando Norris has only maximised some of the weekends. Lando also has to contest with the fact that Piastri is in general getting faster and closer to Lando more as time goes on. While I don't expect Piastri to really fight Norris for the rest of the year, I can see Piastri being very happy to pick up any scraps if Norris makes even the slightest mistake at any point. Kind of like what we saw in Baku. So that is 4 reasons why I don't think Norris will fight for this year's World Drivers' Championship. I admit this video has been very negative against Lando Norris, so to anyone who is a Norris fan, I do apologise if that has upset you somewhat. But honestly, the fact that we are talking about Norris potentially fighting for this year's World Championship is actually a testament to the incredible job that both Lando Norris and McLaren have done to still be in touching distance with Verstappen and Red Bull, who, let's be honest, have been a dominant force since 2022. For me, this year is a learning year for Lando Norris and McLaren. They can learn from this battle and set themselves up nicely, and I think they will do, so that they can then mount a challenge for both championships next year. McLaren are potentially in a position as well to win their first Constructors' Championship since 1998, and that deserves recognition. Even with Lewis Hamilton at the helm, they never managed to win the Constructors' Championship. And if they learn from this, next year they can fight for both titles. However, it will be incredibly close next season, especially as I anticipate that Ferrari and Mercedes will close the gap, meaning that we could have 4 or 5 different drivers who could be in with a shout of winning the 2025 Drivers' World Championship. So the question is, what are your guys' thoughts? Do you think it is still possible that Lando Norris can fight for this year's World Drivers' Championship? I might think it's a bit of a long shot, but what do you guys think? In the comment section down below, please do let me know. Now, this has been a bit of a different video to what I usually do, and the reason for that is because of the big break in the calendar. Thank you F1 for designing such a weird calendar. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, as always, please remember to comment, leave a like, and subscribe for more F1 content. Thank you all so much for watching.